Hello, hello, welcome, please come in. Our Jack of all trades runs are completed, many deaths have been counted, and it's time to hop into the summary video to go through how all those runs went. And the answer is, mostly fine. I mean, there were definitely some sections that were a bit rough here or there. The biggest issue, as I pretty much expected, were lack of durability and lack of damage. Not surprisingly, when you can't focus your stats in any particular way, there aren't really good damage options because basically everything has particular scaling you should be thinking about. I mean, weapon requirements also cause more issues than I really expected. I knew some of the high-end weapons in these games would be out of reach because I'm obviously not going to get all of my stats to super high levels, but even weapons with more modest requirements are a problem when every stat needs to be equal. But that's enough preamble, let's hop into the comparison. And that starts off immediately with difficulty, and the first game, Demon Souls, which gets to slide right into last place in the difficulty ranking. Demon Souls was definitely the easiest game in the series, and there's a couple reasons for that. First off, it really did the best job of any of the three games at solving the damage problem. Spellcasting is very strong in Demon Souls, and while I had considerably worse scaling on those spells because of my low intelligence and faith, that doesn't actually make that big of a difference. Seriously, those are some pretty decent damage numbers. And, of course, the Dragon Longsword. Really, any dragon-infused weapon would have worked. I just chose the Dragon Longsword because you can find it and don't have to worry about upgrading a different weapon. And the Longsword moveset is fine. Amazingly, having a weapon designed around not scaling is still good when you don't have all the stats to have good scaling anyway. Demon Souls also has a lot of bosses that are kind of always easy. Storm's King is basically a cutscene, Old Hero can be pretty easily hit from ranged, Estrella just requires you to parry a few times, and parrying this game is pretty generous. No, don't show that footage. I'm not going to say it was all easy, the areas of the game can be pretty rough, especially when you have so little HP. A stray hit or two can absolutely get you killed. The game also doesn't have that much versatility in its rings or spellcasting. Sorceries really are kinda just, here's your damage button, especially when you only have 2 spell slots to equip anything. And then there are the bosses that are usually kind of tricky. Flame Lurker was rough, though less rough than it could have been thanks to extensive cheesing. I guess Man-Eaters were also pretty easy since I waited so long to fight them. What other bosses are in this game? Oh, Leechmonger. That fight was actually a lot closer and more difficult than I expected, especially because it could heal itself, and my damage was so awful. Though to be fair, a part of that was not grabbing the Dragon Longsword earlier. There was really no reason not to get that ASAP. Oh well. I think the biggest showing is I only lost all my runes once, I think, maybe twice? And that speaks to how comparatively easy this game was. At least compared to the other games in the list. But a lot of that is less to do with this particular challenge and more to do with Demon Souls as a game being easier. And next up is Bloodborne, which, in its first appearance on the channel, has earned a top ranking in the difficulty department, which wasn't super surprising. Bloodborne did have some advantages to make it easier. First, there are fewer stats, and in a challenge where I need to be able to raise all stats at the same time, only having 6 stats is a boon. Bloodborne also leans into a generally more aggressive and risky playstyle, thanks to the speed of combat and the rally mechanic. Love the rally mechanic. But then you get to the problems, and first of them is that the rally mechanic will not help you get HP back if you get one shot, which was not uncommon, especially in the latter portions of the game. Bloodborne also has a lot less nonsense to play around with. Bloodborne, more than most FromSoft games, just tells you to get good. There's no soul arrow, there's no rot breath. There really is just the expectation that you are just going to have to play well to beat this game, which I often do, but not always. Bloodborne does have a decent amount of customization with the Carol runes and the blood gems, but there's a lot less silly stuff. There's no Carrion Slicer or Homing Soul Mass or whatever the best sorcery is in DS1. So when you are faced with a fight, you kinda have to fight it a bit more fairly. And that's usually nice and fun, like the Shadows of Yharnam, but it's sometimes obnoxious nonsense like the one Reborn. Seriously, sir, madam, and otherwise, why do you kick in so many directions? That is nonsense. And Mikolash. Honestly, Mikolash probably would have made this earn the top spot all by himself. I mean, if Beast Roar didn't exist, I guess this is the closest to cheesing a boss as you get in this game. But this boss is an obnoxious sack of garbage anyway. Anytime I complain about Gideon's nonsense, I do need to remind myself that this boss exists. Am I going on so much about Mikolash just so I can watch him get bullied? Yes. But even without Mikolash, this was definitely the hardest game in the series. Demon Souls was about finding bosses that were difficult. Bloodborne was finding bosses that were pushovers. I mean, witches, though they managed to kill me once. And that's not even counting the bosses I just didn't do because they're not required to beat the game. Ligarius, Orphan, with this HP? No thank you. That sounds awful. But yes, Bloodborne handily earns the top spot in the difficulty ranking. Bloodborne was difficult, and my damage was bad, and I was so fragile. And then comes Elden Ring, which gets to slide into the middle position. And that comes down to a number of things. The first is that this game has some real tricky bosses, especially when you aren't dealing as much damage as you'd like, and you have like 8 hit points. Morgott can be tough to target, though he does have about as much HP as I did. Fire Giant has several attacks that will just one-shot you if you aren't very careful, and Malekith is something. Elden Ring also has a lot more scaling throughout the game, which means more levels for your character, which means the gap between where some stats are and where you want them to be grows considerably. Just looking at Vigor, because it's the most notable, and I ended up with a Vigor of 25. Most recommendations for Vigor I've seen is to have it somewhere between 40 and 60 for the endgame, and 15 to 35 points of discrepancy is real rough. For context, at 25 Vigor you have 800 HP. At 40 Vigor you have 1,450. That's not quite double, but it is close. And yeah, that lack of Vigor is notable. The other side of the issue, the damage problem is also very present. Kind of. So there aren't no scaling weapons in Elden Ring. Most weapons should at least expect some stat investment to deal actually good damage. And that meant my damage was pretty bad, except when it was fine, because Elden Ring has just a bunch of status effects, all of which are useful in dealing big damage to enemies. No, not you. Never you. Sometimes you, but usually not. You're not great either. Okay, it's basically Bleed, Rot, and Frostbite. And having the Anspir Rapier to deal Rot and Frostbite, or Bleed, while having a Reduvia for secondary bleed was really nice, except in those instances where a boss had too much status resistance to really be useful, or were just flat out immune. This created a weird situation where sometimes my damage was great, other times my damage was trash, all depending on who I was fighting. And it sure didn't help that one instance of damage bad was the final boss, but having good damage most of the time is really what keeps it out of the top slot, because there are a lot of nonsense damage options in this game. Even aside from status effects, things like Glintblade Phalanx, Black Flame. Why did I not use Black Flame? It deals percentage damage, you idiot. It would have been so useful. Well, anyway, Elden Ring is second place in difficulty. And with difficulty out of the way, we arrive at the recommendation section, and we start with our first game, Demon Souls. And, yeah, it's gonna go in last place. To be fair, I don't want people to think the run was bad or miserable or not a recommend. Just that it was the lowest place on this list. Because there were a lot of sections that were fun and interesting, I think the real reason this is going in the last place is in part because the areas are not my favorite, and the bosses are also not my favorite. I've said it in prior summary videos, but despite the very impressive polish on the game by Bluepoint, this is still a game from 2009, and FromSoft has improved a lot in the intervening 16 years. Because while Demon Souls is definitely still a good game, and still better than many Souls-likes released today, it can't quite match the games that came after. While most of the areas you would need to explore are pretty fun, pretty interesting, and varied in their difficulty, others are not. The prison in Latria is surprisingly linear, despite how maze-like it can seem, and it's just very samey, long, narrow pathways that aren't the most fun. The first area of the Valley of Defilement is basically awful, with progression being a very slow slog, and the less time I have to spend talking about all the rolling skeletons, the better. In a casual playthrough, these aren't really that bad, you can push through them pretty easily, but especially with the low vigor I was stuck at the whole game, these were kind of a slog. The other issue is the bosses in this game are really inconsistent in whether they are fun or not. Some of that is that the bosses are too easy, like the Adjudicator or the Armor Spider. Some of it is the bosses are annoying, like the Tower Knight or the Dragon God. So bosses, which are bluntly the most fun part of basically every FromSoft game, are kind of iffy. Man-Eaters can be fun, or really difficult if you don't have the damage you need. Flame Lurker is mostly fine, though the hitboxes in that fight are not the best. All those factors on top of the challenge run makes it a lot lower recommend than the other games. And again, I would still recommend this. I did genuinely enjoy it, despite my mountain of criticism, but it does need to be placed in the last place slot. And next on the list is Bloodborne, and much as I'd love to put Bloodborne in the top slot, because it is genuinely my favorite game, I can't. It only gets to earn second place. This was a fun run, but it did ultimately lose out to Elden Ring, and the biggest reason why was variety. Bloodborne just doesn't have nearly as many options as other FromSoft games, and that can make runs at the game a bit more static than I would prefer. You do get the trick weapons, which are all pretty versatile, though a decent number of those get cut out of this challenge because of stat requirements. There are also the hunter's tools, but those suffer even more from stat requirements, and of course, hunter tools cost bullets, which is a design decision I hate. Not that they should be infinite, but bullets are just too useful as, well, bullets in this game, especially with how easy parrying is. So there just aren't as many interesting options to spice up a playthrough, especially when the whole impact of even stats is worse damage and worse durability. So a lot of that just makes fights take longer. And while many of the boss fights in this game are quite fun, making them just longer is not necessarily an improvement. So while the intimate gameplay is genuinely quite good, one of the things I enjoy a lot in these runs is planning what weapons I want, what spells, what random bonuses can I get, and when can I get them. And Bloodborne is kind of flat in that regard. Also, while the bosses are generally pretty great, there are some real not great ones. Witches of Hemwick are at best tedious, at worst obnoxious. The one Reborn is weirdly designed. I should go back and watch how you no-hit this game. I'm really curious how you no-hit this. And Mikolash is my least favorite boss in any FromSoft game, and he's fighting against Dragon God, Gideon, Executioner's Chariot, so you know he's working overtime to be the most obnoxious person on this list. I don't think removing Mikolash would put the game at number 1, but it would be closer. And then comes Elden Ring, which of course takes the top slot. And a big part of this is that, for the most part, it's just the best designed FromSoft game to date. I think I prefer playing Night Rain just because it's faster paced and doesn't have the same time commitment. And I do still like Bloodborne more, but Elden Ring is really well done. And where Bloodborne didn't really have enough options to keep me interested across the runtime, Elden Ring debatably has too many. There are so many talismans, so many weapons, with so many ashes of war. And that's not even talking about the spells of every variety. In Demon's Souls and Bloodborne, stat requirements were annoying, stopping me from using certain weapons that I really wanted to use. In Elden Ring, they were honestly kind of a relief. Thank goodness I don't have to look at any weapons with a stat requirement higher than like 20 in anything. There's just so many options, and while you can equip twice as many talismans as rings in Demon's Souls, there's so many options, and I didn't even collect most of the ones that could have been useful. A Howling Drake talisman could have been great for holy damage negation, Axe talisman for better charged attacks, the Fire Scorpion could have done a decent increase to my fire damage against Radagon. Really all the Scorpions, other than Sacred, had points where they could be useful, and I'm glad the other rot weapons are way harder to get, so I could just grab the Ansper Rapier and commit to it, rather than having to think about what other rot. Kindred Exaltation. Why would I not grab the Kindred Exaltation talisman? That's just 20% more damage. But I guess that highlights my point. There are a lot of options, and a lot of ways to adapt all the nonsense this game throws at you. Need some statuses? Have some rot, or bleed, or frostbite. Enemy is immune to statuses? How about lightning, or just big hits? Elden Ring just hits the exact right balance of nonsense in all the ways it could. And that is the thing that I find most interesting about these sorts of challenge runs. So yeah, Elden Ring earns the top spot in the recommended ranking, and frankly that isn't really all that surprising. Game is good. And that is the Jack of All Trades series completed, all wrapped up in a nice comparison bow. I was really excited to do this one. I think it was a lot of fun and created weird restrictions. I guess I didn't include any Dark Souls in here. Well, that's the way it goes, I guess. I did want to shout out that I do have a Patreon, linked in the description. I spend a lot of time making these videos, so if you enjoyed the video, want to support the channel, and are financially stable enough to do so, that exists. No pressure though, this channel is free to enjoy for everyone and will remain that way. For now, if you like this video, be sure to hit the like button. If you'd like to see more of this, feel free to subscribe. Hey, maybe leave a comment if you have something you'd like to say. But whatever you decide to do, have a safe trip home.